Today we have a wonderful guest who goes by the name of Existence, etc.
Yeah, thanks for having me here today. If you guys want to check out my YouTube channel, which is under the name Existence, etc., you can check it out. Ali's going to put a link in the description. We do a lot of existentialist philosophy and literary theory, and we do a lot of existentialist fiction also. But today we're going to be looking at one of my sonnets, which is called Sonnet Number 79. I'm going to go ahead and read it for you guys, and then we'll get into the editing process. The whole world is filled with missing people, and yet I walk outside to crowded streets. There are more missing people than beetles, and yet I can't seem to find any peace. Of human beings, the world is empty, and yet the highways are teeming with cars. Buses, cities, and homes there are plenty, and yet the earth is as barren as Mars. The world is filled with people all around, and yet everyone I see is absent. I may as well be living in Doomtown or camping all by myself in a tent. It feels like everyone lives absently. These humans now only feel apathy.
So the whole world is filled with missing people, and yet I walk outside to crowded streets. There are missing people. There are more missing people than beetles, yet I can't seem to find any peace. And then let me just read the second stanza here. Of human beings, the world is empty, and yet the highways are teeming with cars, buses, cities, and homes. There are plenty, and yet the earth is as barren as Mars. Shouldn't be touching this poem, but we are going to mess with it. So let's go in. So the business with the missing people, I didn't like. I thought the word whole is a word similar to a word like all. So let me see, in fact,
The missing people thing was really difficult because it's difficult to have a word that, or like a phrase that means that there are people, but there aren't really people, you know. So missing kind of could also be empty, maybe. Or if you wanted to use all instead of whole, it could be obviously all the world is filled with empty people.
So in fact, I don't like all or whole. And I need to bring my missing. Oh, let's see if I can. Oh, yes, thank God. I can copy and paste. So we're going to take the word whole out because the world is strong enough. It's okay. So the emphasis is there already. So the world is filled with something concrete. So are there, well, so what do you think? You want to give me something here, or I can come up with something? So I need a synonym, I need a synonym that replaces the phrase missing people with just one word.
Well, I think missing people has to do with the idea of sort of a vacuousness, so maybe empty would be good.
I think, okay, so if we just did empty, let's try that. The world is filled with empty. Actually, that's pretty good.
I actually don't hate that, especially because filled and empty are so opposite to each other. I do like that, yeah.
All right, so let's put that line here because we're running into trouble here and we're going really slowly and this is going to take forever, but here we go. So the world is filled with empty. Wow. Okay, let's keep that in our pocket. I wanted to say the world is filled. So I wanted a simile for the world as well before I get to the missing people. So now I'm going to bring in a simile for the world. It's going to go like this. The world is filled like a high school. So now world is equated to high schools. And what happens in high schools? On a bad Tuesday, and remember, folks, Microsoft Word is going to do this to you, your lines. On a bad Tuesday, on a bad Tuesday, so the world is filled like a high school on a bad Tuesday with subs.
I think subs in this case works well. I think, well, see, this is a case of trusting your readers, right? Because you might think if you're writing this poem, I don't know if they're going to know what subs mean. I don't know if they're going to mean Subway sandwiches, like whatever. No, your audience is going to get it. So trust your audience that they know that subs, in relation to high school has to do with substitute teachers. So in this case, subs is definitely the right word to use.
Very good. And I thought exactly that when I was doing that. I'm like, substitute teacher is just too long, and I had to go with the subs. So we do that on a bad Tuesday with subs. And remember, folks, we have a singular followed by a plural here. Okay. And then we had and then I'm going back to Existence, etc's poem. The third line, there are more missing people than Beatles, and yet I can't seem to find any peace of human beings. The world is empty, yet the highways are teeming with cars, buses, cities, and homes. There are plenty, and yet Earth is as barren as Mars. And so I'm looking at these lines, so let me highlight these lines. In fact, I'm going to bring this stanza here and put it down here. And so we'll always have the original on the left-hand side. That's pretty good. Okay, so we got to this, and now what I want to do is I want to move on quickly to the business of crowded streets without having to say, yet I walk outside. I want to go to, I'm going to come back and go back to the piece, but there are some other things. We have teeming with cars. I want to use that. So let me do this. I'm going to have a list in the poem. So this is where, this is very American. So maybe you can comment on that. Americans love to have lists of things in their poems, and I picked that.
Yeah, I think that also, I don't necessarily know why this is the case, but if you listen to a lot of lyrics in America, a lot of lyrics list a lot of things too. And because poetry and lyrics are, in the same kind of field, you can get that from reading and listening to a lot of American music.
Yep, yep, that's exactly true. In fact, songs, we could call them light verse, or at least Beatles lyrics would call that. Okay, so we're going to do something weird. So I like the crowded streets, and but when I started writing it down here, let's see. So I want to take crowded streets as my first phrase, and it's going to be crowding streets. So the streets are crowding the speaker.
That actually, I think that works really, really well. So if you want to get into the technical side of what Ali just did here, what he did is he obviously took crowded streets, which is sort of a past tense or a present tense thing, as in they are currently crowded, but he took them and he turned it into an action, right? If the streets are crowding, they're becoming more populated, and that adds to the claustrophobic feeling of trying to get away from the emptiness in a way.
Very good, actually. That's yeah, exactly. And then of course when I was doing that in my head, I didn't know that was, but that's the effect. And so we have the state of the mind of the speaker coming into the poem very directly. And then we had let's see, you had the highways. Let's see, highways are teeming with cars. So I drop the car, but I have teeming highways. Okay. And then,
So as you can see in this line, you can already kind of see where this is going. In this case, there's an ing and then a noun and then an ing. So we have crowding and teeming, and that's creating sort of the alliteration, and it's stacking the verbs on top of each other to create the claustrophobic effect, right? It's crowding, it's teeming, you can't escape it. And that's the whole point of what we're doing here.
and so the world, this crowding streets and teeming highways represent the world. And then we want to go back to the world of the high school. And so we bring in, surprisingly, careening hallways, which is not in the original poem. And we also bring in, and this is kind of stupid, but I couldn't resist it, menacing. Because I wanted to talk about crowded hallways in which you feel when you're walking through that menacing. And this dates me pretty well. Dennis's and a dash here before we go on.
So you guys can also see in this case that although the rhyming scheme has kind of been dropped, in this case we have sort of an internal rhyme where we have highways and hallways, and those words are almost identical to each other, and they help to close the list back to high school. And then obviously the name drop of Dennis's also brings it to that high school kind of state.
I was like, okay, I've done all that. What else can I do? I want to bring Beatles in. So I want to put an arrow here because I do want Beatles in here. I still want to go back to the piece thing. And that's where the piece will come in, I'm hoping, as something that brings the structure of the sonnet back in. But I want to go back to this phrase. And yet the earth is as barren as, I'll bring this line up here. And again, we're moving towards utterance without explanation. So the yet explains the relationship between Earth and Mars. And we know this poem is already happening on this Earth. So we could actually just cut this whole section out, actually.
Yeah, so just in terms of ending the stanza for Dennis's, right? And we get that gap from where we get as barren as Mars. The dash at the end of Dennis's, if you don't use a lot of M dashes obviously indicate some kind of pause or some kind of cutting off. So putting the M dash at the end of the list and at the end of the stanza is going to indicate to the reader that there's like a snapping and there's like an end of the list. And then we say it's as barren as Mars, and that's cutting off the list completely.
The world is filled with careening, crowding, teeming, and menacing Dennis's. It is as barren as Mars. So we do that. And in fact, we just do barren as Mars. And now I want to bring in the peace business. And yet I can't seem to, so we're down here. And yet I can't seem to find any peace. And what we can do is, again, we need to shorten that. It's too wordy, it's too much explanation. And so we want to move this from prosy, it's not prosy because it's metrical, but from commentary to utterance. Again, and that has been our main deal.
So in the case of utterance versus commentary, if you don't really have a sense of what those words mean, think about it as having two things. Okay, you're either talking about a feeling or talking from the feeling, right? Or you're making a comment on the feeling. So in the case of commentary, in this case, the commentary that I'm making, or the commentary sort of language that I'm using, is I'm talking about the feeling of absentness and emptiness, but I'm not actually saying it from that feeling. I'm just kind of commenting on it. And it's important for your readers to come to a place of utterance so that you can express the emotion from the emotion rather than distancing yourself from it too much.
For me.
Yeah, so it's important for the case of utterance because it brings a sense of immediacy. It's as though you're in the feeling. It's present rather than being commented on.
In the present, you could say, peace, where is it? Am I ever going to experience peace? Any peace, any kind of peace. Peace. And then you put a question mark.
And so when you bring in this kind of question like this and you say peace, any peace, you can imagine somebody saying it. When we do questions, we imagine somebody saying it rather than the majority of this poem sounds like somebody narrating rather than somebody saying. When you say peace, any peace, in this case, the question evokes an image of somebody maybe asking the sky or asking a crowded street rather than just commenting on an emotion.
Go to the end of the poem, it says, it feels like everyone lives absently. These humans now only feel apathy. And so, in fact, there is no peace. If the ending of the poem wasn't on these, with these two lines, then peace, any peace would have, the answer to that query would have been yes. That's why it's a no, because I read further down in the poem. So we do the no. And now we need to end.
So when we're talking about peace also, this brings about another sort of larger piece of advice, which is that as someone who's writing a poem, you should be playing around with opposites that people do not expect. So when I say the word peace in regards to a mental state or a personal state, you would think of the opposite of that as being chaos, disorder, craziness, whatever. But in this case, as we see at the end of the poem, the opposite of peace in regards to the emotion I'm commenting on is actually apathy, which people sort of associate with being a peaceful state, but apathy is really sort of a more hollow state than actual peace.
Very, very good, very good. And on a bad Tuesday with subs, crowding streets, teeming highways, careening hallways, menacing Dennises, barren as Mars. I didn't like that transition. Peace, any peace? No, that's fine too. Let's go back here. And so I did not like the missing transition here.
So if you don't like the transition for that one, an idea that I had is that you could do menacing Dennis's peace, any peace, no, barren as Mars, and switch around those two.
Perfect. That is a perfect solution. That reads better than the way I had it. So I'm moving here, and then barren will be with an uppercase. Excellent.
Yeah, this is the Hemingway style. So that obviously Hemingway was a prose writer, not a poet writer. But in Hemingway's writing, you can see a lot of sort of cutting off and bouncing, especially during emotional moments. You'll have narration, and then you'll just have like no or maybe or perhaps not, and that'll kind of cut it off. And so by having no in the middle of the line, it provides that kind of stuttering effect.
Now we still have a transition problem, at least in my head. So, and the problem is subs, period, and then the list sentence lines crowding. So let me read this again. The world is filled like a high school on a bad Tuesday with subs, crowding streets. So one of the things is subs is plural. We could make Tuesday into plural. And then there's something called bad, which I was like, what about if we went from bad to on terrible Tuesdays? So we have the alliteration going on. So the world is filled like a high school on terrible Tuesdays with subs. And so we got two plural words, and then we get streets, highways, hallways. And so now we don't, so what happens is if you have a singular and then we jump to plural, we start with plural and continue with the plural. Okay.
And then barren as Mars is extremely singular, cuts it off again. So it would have been wrong to say barren as the deserts of Mars, right? Because that continues the plurality. By the time we reach the M dash, we're done with the plurality and we're bringing it back to the singular, cutting it off.
Last stanza from the poem right here. The world is filled with people all around, yet everyone I see is absent. I may as well be living in Doomtown. When I read Doomtown, I get excited. And then I was just told what Doomtown is.
So Doomtown, if you guys don't know, the reason that it's capitalized is because it is a proper noun. It is a real thing. So a Doomtown is back in the mid 1900s, back in maybe the 50s, I guess, was when they were most popular. They did these nuclear bomb tests, and they would test them on fake towns. And these fake towns would be filled with mannequin people, and it would be all staged to look very real. It's super creepy. Look up photos of it. If you guys have ever seen the fourth Indiana Jones movie, it's the one that he right before he gets into the fridge to escape the nuclear bomb blast, he's in a doom town. And so you can imagine doom towns as being towns that are full of people, but yet empty inherently.
I may as well be living in Doomtown or camping all by myself in tent. So here we have two implicit. So what's happening is that the experience of absence, which is described in these two lines by the speaker of the poem, is then compared to living in Doomtown or camping all by myself in a tent. And so what I do now is, so this whole business of world is filled with people all around and yet everyone I see is absent. These two lines that are highlighted are here already. So we don't have to go back to that. Actually, all of that describes these two lines already. So we can take this out. And here we go. And then all we need is we're going to do a jump, no transition. We jump to Doomtown, and I'm gonna bring in my second simile. So I'm gonna replace the or with a simile. And so living in Doomtown is like, so in some ways I've compressed or conflated two similes, two analogies into, I don't know, something. So camping.
It's getting compressed, like a lot of what we did earlier. And in this case, like he said, we've already done the list thing, so we didn't need to bring in necessarily too much. We just wanted to bring in Doomtown, just because Ali likes that one, and that's a solid choice.
Oh, sorry. So I'm gonna copy and paste, which I just did. And here we go. So Doomtown, like camping all by myself. So we got that line, all by myself in a tent. And so as usual, my hatred for words like all has not diminished. So that's gone. Like camping by myself, again, stronger. Whenever you lose words, it's a good thing. It's not like losing money. And then we have in a tent, and I wanted to place the tent somewhere. And so I came up with something.
So just to make a comment on tent and whatnot, Ali wants to place the tent, or the noun, the word tent, in a different place. And because we're working with a more free verse style at this point, we have the freedom to do that. I don't know where you would want to put tent.
I want to put the tent in Iowa. So we're leaving the shale landscape of Colorado, and we're moving to Iowa. Actually, we should be going to Nevada because that's where the Doomtown is. Oh, all right. We have to go to.
Well, in Nevada, I think it's a really good choice because if you have ever looked at a picture of rural Nevada in your entire life, you'd be like, yeah, that's Mars right there. Like literally Nevada looks exactly like Mars, and that brings us back to the barren idea. Because Iowa is flat and it's sort of it's obviously very rural, but obviously lots of things grow in Iowa and they have farms and stuff, but Nevada is barren. There is nothing in Nevada. Yeah.
What about Arizona? I want to know, where was the nuclear testing done most?
It was mostly done in Nevada and New Mexico. Yeah, that's correct.
So, okay, should we go with Nevada or New Mexico?
I think that's a good question. The thing with Nevada, obviously, is that it's known for being rural. I mean, it has Las Vegas in it, which is a problem, whereas New Mexico doesn't have any like really big cities in it. Albuquerque is not nearly as big as Las Vegas, but I feel like Nevada just has a more phonetic pleasure to it because it's one word and it is 3 syllables, whereas New Mexico is, obviously 2 words and 4 syllables. So I think Nevada is a good choice.
Also, new doesn't bring anything. Nothing new there. Okay, so Doomtown, like camping by myself in a tent in I'm gonna do something stupid here. Crowding Nevada. Actually, that does sound better than crowding New Mexico. Crowding Nevada. Nevada, I can't even pronounce this word. And I'm going to delete all of this. You were going to say something.
Yeah, I think bringing the word crowding back in works really well, especially because we had crowding as a drop for the ing words. It was the one that started all the ing words, and it started at the beginning of the line with the capital, whereas now we just kind of subtly drop it in the middle of a line. And to put crowding Nevada, that just rolls off the tongue really well. It's got a lot of phonetic base to it. I think that's a good choice.
And again, these adjectives are weird. So we're keeping the weird alive. 2, we're trying to, in such a short poem, for some kind of closure. And so we're desperate and we just pick up that word again from up here and bring it down. The title issue. The world is filled like a high school on terrible Tuesdays with subs. World is filled with subs like in a high school on terrible Tuesdays. The world is filled with subs. No. Like in a high school on terrible Tuesdays. I think that's better. Maybe.
I actually like that choice a lot. It brings us back. It's a more concise way of saying missing people, because subs, I mean, obviously they are people and obviously they are present when they're being subs, but there's something temporary and not quite real about them, and they don't have the immediacy of like a regular teacher. So I think using the world is filled with subs, I think that works perfectly, and I think it goes back to the original intent.
Exactly, because if you look at the line here, very good catch there, Mr. E. The whole world is filled with missing people. The world is filled with subs. And therefore, in order to actually make that complete, we're going to move like down here. Because now the first line of the transformed poem and the first line of the original poem are identical.
Maybe the longitude and latitude of Doomtown. I think that would be a really interesting idea. I don't know the latitude and longitude of Doomtown, but obviously we have the internet, so we can figure it out.
And I said, oh, here we go. So here are the images. And let's see. So can you visit the Doomtown? Oh, there it is. I see it. It's right there.
All right, so we went with that idea of doing the Doomtown coordinates just because we wanted to go with the number, and we had Doomtown in the poem, and Ollie went and he grabbed them. He's going to paste them in right now. This is really interesting in the case that it's going to be like a reference that not everybody gets. So, of course, people who are really interested are going to read the poem, and then they're going to look up the coordinates, and they're going to find out that they're the Doomtown coordinates. and it's just going to be a really cool thing for the reader. So if you're writing a poem and you want to leave little clues and little references and things, it can be really interesting to lead your reader along in that kind of investigation.
And there you are. Could you read the final version, please?
Yeah, for sure. I'm really glad with how this turned out. So obviously I'm not going to read out that whole title, but it's a coordinate. And then we're going to go with, the world is filled with subs, like in a high school on terrible Tuesdays. Crowding streets, teeming highways, careening hallways, menacing Dennis's. Peace, any peace, no. Barren as Mars. Doomtown, like camping by myself in a tent in a crowding Nevada.
Very good. And as you were reading it, I was thinking, because that's where you thought I was going to go earlier, and I didn't. And then is that right? Isn't that where you were going?
Absolutely. I think that that's a good idea to have that space like that. It fills out the poem more and it cuts it off more, because having the M dash by itself is obviously a really great way to cut off the list. But having an M dash and another break in the text, I think really just cuts it off completely for sure.
Because it's a jump. It's definitely a jump, and it needs to be explicitly signaled. We decided to change the title to Doom Town.